Welcome to Podjunction Podcast, a show for podcasters who want to use their podcast to grow their business. I'm your host, Sadaf Beynon, and today I'm joined by that podcast guy, Mark Asquith. Mark is the managing director and co-founder of Captivate.fm and a pioneering force in the podcasting industry. With over a decade of experience, he's helped countless podcasters turn their passions into profitable businesses. Mark, welcome to the show.
Well, hello. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Mark, it's great to have you here. So you've been in the podcasting space for over a decade now, and you've seen the industry evolve quite significantly. Could you take us back to where it all began for you? What drew you into podcasting?
Yeah, it's sort of an interesting story. I think one that people relate to that listen to Podjunction, but I think one that is very common yet also quite personal. And I think that's a very interesting theme for a lot of podcasters anyway. Mm-hmm. So I was a small business owner. I was a design agency owner, built a design and brand and software agency here in the north of England. Used to do fantastic work for fantastic clients, everything from grassroots businesses right up to multinationals, blue chip companies, people like the Art Directors Club in New York, a lot of multinational stuff. So it was really interesting stuff. But I want to say about 2011, I was starting to get a little bit bored of it. We'd grown to a big enough size where everyone was comfortable. We were earning, fine money. But I was getting a little bit bored. I was getting a little bit, I think frustrated with agency life, always having to pitch for new clients and just this kind of complete hamster wheel constantly, which it was just dull to me. So I was looking for more of a creative outlet. And I'm big into pop culture. If anyone's watching a video version of this or have ever seen me on video from here in my home office, you'll see there's loads of memorabilia, Star Wars stuff, DC comic stuff. I'm a big pop culture nerd. So I started writing with a friend of mine, Gary Aylett, about pop culture on a website that we called Two Shots to the Head, and that became a podcast. And from there, I started, I suppose, the classic interview podcast. This is really back in maybe 2013 now. So we've done the podcast Pop Culture Show for a couple of years. And I started my own interview podcast in business. Mm-hmm. And it was mainly for two reasons: to kind of help people out in small business, but also to just position myself as a bit of a thinker in small business locally. But what happened was that I very quickly realized that the podcasting, technological elements of podcasting at least, those parts of it were very broken. There wasn't much out there. There was not many hosting platforms out there. Technology was difficult. There was no need for it to be that difficult. So I found myself in an interesting position. I was here in the UK. No one else was into podcasting. That's why I've got that British podcast guy moniker. I used to go and speak at all these events. And I was literally one of the only British people there. And because I was generally the one speaking out of all of us Brits that were there, that became my thing. So I very quickly start to put together sort of solutions for podcasters, web platforms for podcasters, and so on and so forth. And I sort of just got into the industry, got to know everyone in the industry, started working in the industry, built businesses in the industry. And then I think in 2017 I segued out of my agency. We got rid of the agency. I was, like I said, very bored of it. Moved into being a software company through our podcasting technology, and then founded Captivate, the hosting platform that people generally know us for today, which in turn was then acquired by Global back in 2021. And I still run that. I still, basically do the same job as I did before. So yeah, quite an interesting little tale really, but it's certainly one rooted in small business, which is quite interesting.
Yeah, that is really interesting. And you're right. This is what what Podjunction is about. So this is perfect. You talked about you wanted to start creating solutions for podcasters. Was that based on your own experience and stuff that you wanted to be able to have at your fingertips to make your podcasting life easier for you? Is that where that came from?
I think that's certainly where we moved to with Captivate. Initially, it was very much around just taking the knowledge that we had and helping, because actually, let me go back a little bit. Most podcasters back in 2014, 15, when I started making technology here, were either like the entertainment-y celebrity podcast, Kevin Smith and those people, Joe Rogans of the world, or there was like this massive entrepreneur thing. You know, it was like, oh, if you're a quote unquote entrepreneur, you got to have a podcast. It's quick route to six figures. Absolute rubbish, complete rubbish. But that's what everyone was selling. You know, you had people selling that dream. So I sort of spotted that gap with my co-founder Kieran, and we said, well, wait a minute, most of these people are going to want a way to display that podcast publicly, a way to host it a little bit easier than they've currently got the ability to do in terms of a hosting platform, and to bring everything together in terms of tech stack. So that's what we started doing. So it was, it was to scratch my own itch, but it was more about I'd spotted the opportunity. But then because I became a much more seasoned podcaster really quickly, you know, I'm probably sat here now 10 years, 11 years, 12 years into this, probably done 1,700 podcast episodes, I would guess. I became seasoned quite quickly. And that's when I started seeing things like, oh, actually, maybe we could make the hosting element easier using Captivate. Or maybe now we've got a podcast hosting platform, maybe we could add these features to make my life easier, which in turn would make everyone's life easier. Which is where the brand of Captivate really grew and elevated from, was just, you know, a complete lack of competitor awareness. We just didn't care. We purposely didn't look at other competitors, because otherwise you end up just sort of mimicking them.
Doing whatever they're doing. Yeah.
So it's certainly to scratch my own itch, but to start with, it was very much around the technology space in podcasting just wasn't very good back then.
Yeah, that's cool. So when did you first see the potential for podcasting as a business tool for yourself? I
think straight away, really. I mean, it's like anything. It's only got potential if you actually put time and effort into it. It's like anything. You know, it isn't a get rich quick thing. It's not the secret ingredient. It's not the silver bullet. It's not the thing that's going to supercharge your business and 10x your revenue. You know, all that rubbish you see in the books. It's not that. So I saw the potential for it as a channel really early, but the problem was not that many people were listening. And now there are so many more people listening. So it was, I spotted it early, but I was also very aware that it needed heck of a lot of good work and consistency, which I think back then, a lot of people had spotted it as a potential channel, but they thought it was this get rich quick thing, which was, that's a shame, you know, because that's just not right.
So how would you say then, based on what you've just said, would you, like the perception of podcasting as a marketing tool, how do you think that's changed among businesses since the industry first started? So, you know, you're saying they used it as a get rich quick tool, or they tried to, but where things are at now, how do you think that perception's changed for businesses?
Well, I think the first thing to do is to categorize businesses. Those people that I'm talking about that were using it as get rich quick were the quote unquote entrepreneurs.
Right.
And what I mean there is online marketers that would build traffic to a website and sell advertisements, sell affiliate products. Nothing wrong with that, but let's not confuse that with an entrepreneur, you know, Richard Branson, Steve Jobs. You know, they're the genuine entrepreneurs in my mind. The reason that I say that is because I think it's important to understand that actually what we're talking about is a genuine small business, you know, that is actually to this day, and even in 2024, as we're sat here, you know, that are still seeing podcasting as bleeding edge. You know, many small businesses now are still seeing podcasting as bleeding edge, but they're now able to get into it a little bit more. And I think that's what's changed, is this idea that podcasting is an entertainment and education medium. It is. It's like any other channel. It's like TV. It's like broadcast media. It's like YouTube. It's like writing, anything, whether it's a blog or a book. It's like any other channel. You've got to entertain or educate, or a little mix of both. And I think when people understood that, and when people figured that out and actually realized that you've got to provide content that will help to position you as the expert, because that's ultimately what the businesses in the space are looking to do. But it's got to be educational, and it's got to be useful, and importantly, it's got to be entertaining. And I think that's been the big shift, is that, you know, even some of the biggest interview podcasts that had the same format because it was cool to batch record and you could just record the same old stuff and just put it out all the time. They can't do that anymore. They're not doing that anymore, because there are other better shows out there that will deliver much of the same value, but in just a better way. And I honestly think that's the tipping point, or has been the tipping point the last 4 or 5 years, is that people have seen that this is a genuine media that requires the same attention as anything that you put your effort into. And it's not just get a mic, run an interview, sell some affiliate stuff, make $100,000 a month. You know, it's just, it just isn't that way. So I think that's been the big change.
Yeah. So do you think this shift has come from, I guess, trying to figure it out and realize their get-rich-quick schemes weren't working? And so is it a part of that, or is it to do with society as well? Like, is it the way they're absorbing content? Has that changed? Do you know what I mean? Is it
I do.
a myth? Yeah.
I do. I think it's both. Yeah. I think if we take the consumer angle first, podcast listening has grown and grown and grown. It's now in the lexicon. It's now mainstream.
Yeah.
And what that has caused is more bigger media companies. You know, we were purchased by Global. We one of our podcasts that launched 14 months ago is just about to hit 100 million downloads aggregate.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
It's a huge show. And we've got a lot of those shows. And the general podcast listener has got so much more choice of high quality talent coming into the space and creating great shows. So that's the first thing. The targeted listener, the business owner that might be listening to Podjunction, actually has got so many other shows to choose from. You know, we want them to choose Podjunction, but they could choose other shows, whereas before they couldn't. So I think that's one element of it, is that the listener is much more savvy. They're aware that it's not just for the nerds and it's not just for education and the gurus. And then I think you're right. On the other side of that coin, you know, a lot of people started podcasts having bought a podcasting course from someone whose entrepreneurial vision was to sell podcasting courses. Like, they weren't making money from their podcast. They were making money because they were teaching people how to podcast. And then they built an audience, sold sponsorships, and that's cool. But a lot of gurus back then, what they were doing is saying they were entrepreneurs and business people and trying to teach business when actually they were just podcasters. And that's great. There were podcasters that were making money from sponsorships. But not every podcaster can do that, and not every podcaster can monetize an audience on the back end. So a lot of these people bought these courses, or they bought the things from the gurus, realized it's really not as rosy as it was painted, and decided that actually, do you know what? I'm either going to quit, and a lot did, or I love talking and I love sharing my message, but I'm actually going to reevaluate my mission with my podcast, or I'm going to reevaluate the type of effort that I put into my podcast in order to get the results. So yeah, I do think there's been a couple of big tectonic shifts that have caused that change in behavior.
Yeah, that's cool. What kinds of things do you think businesses need, or podcasters who are using their podcast to grow their business, what kind of things do they need to be doing in that podcast to help growth for their business?
Well, I mean, you've got to have good content. You know, it can't just be get someone on, interview them the same format as everyone, because I'll just say the same stuff. I'll just say the same stuff on every podcast. I can't help it, because if you ask me the same questions, I will say the same stuff. It's inevitable. So I think you've got to plan your content out more. I think you've got to be better as a podcaster. We all have to capture the right news bites, the right one-liners, the right sound bites that you can use to build a conversation around. And if you're doing an interview show, but I think overall you have got to produce the content that is real good quality deep dive stuff. It's not just top level. Let's get an episode out because we've said we're going to put an episode out every Tuesday. Actually, let's be purposeful about it. And I think one of the other things is that people don't design their podcast. What they do is they'll turn up and they'll just go, right, you know what? Get a mic. We'll do some interviews. That's cool. And the problem with that is that they don't think through the rest of it. All right. They don't think through the rest of it. So what they don't do is say, right, what's the outcome that we want with this podcast? Well, the outcome is, let's say that I'm an accountant, right? Accountant is boring, but it's vital. So let's try and make it a little bit less boring, but actually let's not forget that it is vital. And what do we want out of this? We might want leads, but actually realistically, how do we get leads? Are we going to get people on an email list? Are we going to do some social interaction? Have we got a proper funnel in place? How are we going to get people to take some action and channel shift them to something else? You know, move them from a podcast and shift them to a different channel, whether that is an email list or whatever. And people don't design that. So what they tend to do is they might have, let's say they've got a lead magnet, right? Real basic stuff from back in the day. They've got a lead magnet. Download my ebook on how to, how to save 5% of your tax every year by making sure you're claiming the right things, whatever. But what they do is they start an episode and say, hey, what's going on? This is the Accountancy 101 podcast. My name is Mark. Don't forget to subscribe to the email list at such and such and such. And don't forget to tell your friends about the show and listen on Apple, Spotify. Oh, and go to this website and do this thing. Follow us on social media, blah, 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 blah. They forget that actually that's too much cognitive load. People get overwhelmed by that. Instead, the biggest design mistake people make with a podcast is not just having one single call to action.
Yeah.
Welcome to Accountancy 101. Today, 5 ways that you can save money on your tax bill by claiming the right expenses. If you need more of this, go and get the checklist at markasquith.com/101. Speaking of which, here's my guest, and we're going to talk about X, Y, and Z. Then 3 minutes later, that's a really great point. And remember, you, the listener, don't forget markasquith.com/101. It gets you the thing. And then 10 minutes later, really love the stuff, love chatting. We are going to switch gears in a sec, but remember, markasquith.com/101. And now a lot of people don't do that. They think they've got to do everything. They've got to say everything. And no one's going to move. No one will go and follow you on social. No one will go and do that because what's the point? They don't want to. They're not there for that. They're in the gym. They're walking. They're doing the housework. They're in the car. They're not doing that. What we've got to do is get to that memory. We've got to embed, just like all touch points in marketing, is embed ourselves in the memory so that the next time something spurs me to think about the topic, I'll think, oh, actually, that's it. That's in the back of my head. Oh, yeah, I forgot about that. I should go and do that. So that's the single biggest design mistake that small business podcasters make, is that they think about everything. They think about covering everything. We used to do for the design agency, this is a really bizarre sort of analogy. We had a client who wanted us to do we did all their website, all their branding and everything. And we had they wanted us to design some wraps for their van. The livery for the van, right? And this company did. They did plumbing, heating, gas engineering, air conditioning. They did ground source heat pumps, solar panels, the lot. And they said, we want every service we do on the back of our van. And we said to them, you probably don't, actually. You probably just need the word for everything plumbing, heating, and engineering.
Yeah.
Here's my phone number. And they were staunchly against it. And I was like, well, that's cool. But I'm pretty sure that's the wrong way. Sure enough, they came back a few months later. Mark, no one can read this at 70 mile an hour. Yeah, really? No way. And the point is, it's a very simple change that many small businesses can make. Yeah. And a lot of people don't get traction from their podcast because of this. They'll say, well, I'm doing this podcast and it's costing me money. And I'm not getting anything from it. Yeah, because the listener doesn't know what you want them to do. All right, so that's a huge thing. And quite literally 95% small business podcasters make that mistake. So fix that. And that's a huge thing done.
And what's a good CTA? Whatever
is mapped to your own process. So if we use the example of, there's two ways to think about this one. There's the online CTA if we want people to channel shift through. So let's use the ebook as an example. I'm an online entrepreneur. I want to sell consulting services, coaching services, ebook products, whatever. I want to sell courses, whatever. You've got to find out what people are wanting, do your survey data, figure out what people want, and then basically just find a way to give them a really value-packed solution. Great example of this would be, we sell a hosting platform called Captivate. We want people that want to start a podcast or who've already got a podcast and are serious about growing their podcast, right? We surveyed the audience, real deep dive survey, went through a range of open-ended questions, siphoned through the answers, and came up with the fact that there are probably 4 things, only 4. One of these things will stop you starting a podcast. So we created a course and a quiz that's all free, that is our lead magnet. And that's the one lead magnet, because we know it hits our audience.
Yeah.
On the other side of it, that might not work. It's not going to work for the plumbing company. It's not going to work for the local electrician. It isn't. So the call to action might be, if I'm John, the local electrician, and I've got a podcast, a local podcast. Actually, my goal is not to have an electrician's podcast. It's to have a podcast about the village that I live in or the town that I live in. It just so happens to be sponsored by my company, the electrical company. And what's the thing you've got to remember? My name. Oh, and guess what? Here's what you search for to Google me. So the call to action might just be, welcome to the Manchester local podcast. This has been great. Remember, this is brought to you by John's Electrical. Search John's Electrical Manchester for everything that you need. And that's it. That's all you say.
That's it.
Just keep saying that. So there's no right answer to what is the right CTA, the right call to action. It has to be mapped to the business goals and to that wider marketing strategy. So And again, that's something that many small businesses just don't have, is a strategy. They're just like, we exist.
Yeah.
People will probably come. And they don't. We know that.
Yeah. So I'm just thinking in terms of email addresses. You mentioned that earlier too. Like, is there a CTA? Like, if you're trying to get email addresses, is a lead magnet the right way to go?
Yeah, if you're trying to get email addresses, you just got to have one simple, easy to remember URL to send people to. markasquith.com/101, whatever. That's not a real thing, but assume it is. And it's got to be memorable. It's got to be quick. Yeah, get it in your show notes and whatever else. That's obvious. Talk about it online, whatever. But it's got to be quick. It's got to be memorable. It has to be somewhere that looks trustworthy. It's got to be somewhere that doesn't have like the SSL certificate issues, doesn't have any issues with your website. It's got to look good. It's got to be well designed, well thought out, well structured, good copywriting, good photography. But it's got to be simple to remember. And it's just got to be one small thing. I could say to you, if let's assume I sponsor Podjunction and you say to me, our audience are looking to start a podcast for their small business. You might say, all right, Mark, can you record an advert? And we'll put it in. And that's what you get for your sponsorship. Let's assume that I want to use that course as the lead magnet, which is essentially the same as an email list.
Yeah.
You're signing up for something, you're going to use it. My structure of my advert would be, are you a small business looking for more leads and want to grow through podcasting? Well, did you know there are actually only 4 reasons that you will not launch your podcast this month? Go and find out what the one big stopper is right now by answering 2 questions at captivate.fm/podcast, whatever. It's quick, it's simple, but what I've done is I've said, I've done the alignment part. Are you a this?
Yeah.
And then I've done the aspiration part, and you're wanting to do X with Y. However, I know my research, I've done the research, so I know that I can say, however, you're probably struggling with something, but I'm not going to tell you what the something is, because my job is to help you to go to my website where the free diagnosis will get you into the course. So that it's a very quick methodology.
Yeah.
But it gets people thinking. And I think if you can push people to thinking like that, the calls to action become way more effective, and you need far fewer listeners to achieve much greater results with your podcast. So that's quite a big thing to remember.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Apart from a great CTA, is there other ways that a podcaster who's using their podcast to grow their business can turn their listeners into customers? I mean,
if you were to not put any call to action in, the only thing that you're doing is positioning yourself as the thought leader.
Right.
And that will just have a big, long-lasting, long-tail halo effect. That's it. It might lead to something in a few years when someone's seen you here and they've seen you on your podcast, they've seen you at an event, they've done some research because they're now looking for an electrician. Oh, and actually, that's the person from the podcast. I forgot about them.
Yeah.
So they feel a bit more relatable to me. So it's not, if you were using your podcast for small business, you have to do something to get people to do something. You can't just it's like just writing blog posts and expecting people to do something on your website. That's cool. But unless there's a big call to action in the middle of your blog post 2 or 3 times, or the website is set up to actually encourage people to do other things after they've read the blog post, they'll just read the blog post and off they go then. And you don't get anything from it. So that's a big miss in my opinion.
Yeah, it sounds more like, when you're listening to you talk, it sounds more like a slow burn, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah, and it wouldn't even burn. Down. You would struggle to set it on fire because it simply wouldn't burn. It would just, people would come into your content, they'd leave the content that you'd done, and they'd be none the wiser on how to get to know you, how to contact you, what you can really do to help them, which is pointless. You may as well start a comedy podcast, or you may as well start a Star Wars podcast and just enjoy it, Because this is the really specific thing. Like, you can do that in podcasting, but you've got to be an entertainment podcast to do it. And if you're a small business, we only do things that have impact.
Yeah.
And thus we need to tell people what to do next. So it's pretty commonsensical when you really think about it, but it's people forget about it. Because look, let's be honest. I don't start my electrical business to become a quote unquote entrepreneur or a marketer or a sales guru. I started to be an electrician and just want to make some money to pay my mortgage. I don't want to learn these other things. So it's forgivable to forget about it.
Something you said at the earlier on in the podcast was when you started doing your classic interview style ones, One was to help other small businesses, and two was to establish yourself or position yourself as a thinker / thought leader. Yeah. So about thought leadership then, how can podcasters who are in this space, like who'd be listening to Podjunction, how can they leverage their show to establish themselves as thought leaders in their particular industry?
The thing you cannot do is be boring and forgettable. You've got to have an opinion, be willing to listen to counter arguments against that opinion, be willing to be flexible and open, but you have to have something to say. You have got to be willing to not try to please everyone. Because if you please everyone, you ain't pleasing anyone. You've got to be willing to understand that every time I say something about podcasting, someone might like it and the other person might hate it. And I'm all right with that. I'm not everyone's cup of tea. That's cool. I don't care. Because it helps me to filter out the right people. Now, Dave Jackson, great friend of mine, wonderful podcast educator, might say the exact same words as me. But he says it in Dave's way and with Dave's tone. And the person that hates what I say might love when Dave says it and vice versa. And that's a big thing, is that you can't be a thought leader if you don't think. You know, thought leadership and authenticity and all this stuff just became this kind of ethereal rubbish about 8-9 years ago.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh, I'll be a thought leader by just putting anything out there. Well, no, to be a thought leader, you've got to think. You've got to have your opinion, your view, your method and way of articulating things. And I'm very specific in the way that I do that. You know, I'm very quite outspoken. If I see something that I think is rubbish, I'll just say that's clearly rubbish, and here's the reasons that I think it's rubbish. And if you disagree, present your reasons. And if I'm wrong, then I will happily learn from it. But right now, I think that's rubbish. And I will happily say that. Whereas a lot of people, small businesses, they don't want to do that. You know, that's not us. We don't want to annoy anyone. Well, by simply putting anything out online, you are already annoying someone. You are. You can be as grey and as beige and as boring and as completely lackluster as you want and sit on as many fences as you want. But you will still annoy someone. So you may as well do it with a bit of gusto and actually have something to say. And that is a huge thing that people simply are scared to do.
I feel like the word thought leader has become a bit of a buzzword. I think everyone wants to be a thought leader, but I think listening to you speak, there's an element of, one, of course, you got to know your stuff and think about it and have an opinion on things, you know, put that stake in the ground. But also there's an element of being in the trenches and really understanding it. It's not just having an opinion, it's actually really knowing it inside out, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I'm trying to say.
It's like you can't sort of be the Dunning-Kruger effect personified. You can't just have a little bit of knowledge and assume you know everything and then go out renegade.
Yeah.
You know, you've got to, if you're going to position yourself as a thought leader, then you've got to be the second part of that, which is the leader part of it. And then you've also got to be not necessarily an expert, but you've got to have enough knowledge and enough well-rounded knowledge to understand all aspects of the topic that you're talking about. Like I understand every aspect of podcasting. You know, I'm here running Captivate, and we work with indie podcast creators that are just starting. We work with established creators, but yet we also work with shows with, 300, 400,000 downloads an episode, massive advertisers, people that are monetizing through memberships and tipping. We understand how the advertising systems work, the technicalities of it, but also the contractual and commercial elements of it. And yet I also can turn up at Podfest and talk to someone that is starting a podcast because they want to help kids to get scholarships, and you've got to be well-rounded enough to do that. And we know this already, is that you can only have a well-formed opinion if you know all sides of the tale. And it's the same with anything. So you're absolutely right. You can't just show up and be renegade for no reason.
I know time is short, Mark, but I just want to switch gears slightly over here and ask you to tell us a bit more. I know you've mentioned Captivate and some of the stuff that you guys do there, but I was wondering if you could maybe talk to how it might address needs of business podcasters in particular.
Yeah, business people are busy. I'm a business person. I'm busy. Don't have time for anything. And when you create a podcast, there are so many moving parts to that. And what we've done with Captivate is, yes, we're a hosting platform that will distribute and monetize your podcast through Apple, Spotify, and wherever else. But we're also a podcast management system. So our promise is we'll either save you money, make you money, or save you time. Signing up to Captivate, we'll do one or more of those three things. And we do that through connecting all the dots. So many people use things like Calendly to book their guests. and they use Notion or Evernote to research their guests, Captivate actually has, we've got a calendar and guest booking system built in, interview management built in. We've got episode research and planning tools built in, all in one place, so that, guess what? You don't have to write your show notes. You don't have to worry about your website. You don't have to worry about that. Captivate does that element all for you. And there's a lot of that. It's not just those elements. That's very much the mantra of Captivate, is that we will help you to run and to grow your podcast with very few moving parts. It becomes very simple to access really powerful things that are usually reserved for the top tier podcasters. If you're a startup podcaster now, using Captivate, you can have access to the same kind of tools that the biggest podcasts in the world use, and it's not going to cost you any more, and it's going to save you that time. So we're a very specific company that work with a very specific type of podcaster. If a podcaster identifies as being serious about growing their audience, Captivate's generally the best hosting platform for them.
Yeah. We've been using Captivate for several years now, and it really is a great platform, and it's been really beneficial for us. And we do quite a few different podcasts as well. So yeah, it's just great to have everything in one place. And the tools are really helpful for businesses. Yeah, thanks for that.
Thank you. Very kind.
So Mark, just quickly, any key lessons that you've learned about using podcasts for business growth? Yeah,
design something that's entertaining. Even if it's intended to be educational, make it entertaining, because that is what helps you to stand out. The second thing is that one call to action. Design a call to action that will serve your business well. Usually it's something that would, if we were going traditional on our marketing, would sit a little bit higher up the funnel, something awareness led that moves people from the attention and the interest to the desire stage and then the action stage. It sits somewhere around there. And then the third thing would be, podcasting is very much a long-term thing. It's not something that will make you millions straight away, but it is something that if you persist with it and you're consistently good with it and you think about it as a long-term channel strategy, it's something that will continue to serve you even if you stop publishing. Your brand will be out there. It will be part of the experience of your brand, and it will serve you beyond the effort that you put into it if you treat it with that time and respect that I think it needs in the early days. And I think if you can do those things, that puts you in the top 5-6% of small businesses out there using podcasting, because I think so many people just simply don't do the basics like that.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. And another thing, within 60 seconds, can you tell me why you think podcasting is a great tool for growing one's business?
When it comes to growing your business, there's no easier method of becoming well known within your niche than using podcasting. There's no other medium that allows you to craft a story that relates to your business in such a strong way, whilst positioning you as a thought leader and allowing you to move people from listening to your podcast and enjoying you as the thought leader into doing something where they end up working with you, whether that's a product, service, or something else. By using podcasting, you can become the person that people think of that becomes synonymous with solving the problems that they're trying to solve. And very often, because they already know you, they trust your voice, they've listened to you for such a long time, it becomes easier to make money using that and that relationship. And you can nurture that into a lot of lifetime value that goes both ways. Yes, you earn your revenue, but your customers get so much more from it as well. So it's a very powerful medium.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. Thanks very much. Mark, really appreciate you joining us today. It's great to talk with you. Where can our listeners find more information about you?
Captivate.fm is the place. It's got everything on there, the hosting stuff. It's got my details on there. It's got the courses. It's got everything. Yeah, just Captivate.fm.
Awesome. Thanks again, Mark.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And to our listeners, thank you for tuning into Podjunction Podcast. I hope today's episode inspires you to think creatively about how you too can leverage podcasting for your own business growth. Be sure to check out Mark's podcast and to reach out to him. The links will be on the show notes. And if you found this episode helpful, we'd love for you to leave a review or share it with someone who could also benefit. I'm Sadaf Beynon. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.